When I entered my son's new house, his wife stood at the door and said, "This home is only for real family. Please don't embarrass us in front of our guests." I didn't argue. I just smiled. An hour later, when the lawyer arrived, she found out the house was still registered in my name. Before I tell you how it all happened, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know. My name is Elaine Carter, and I am 61 years old. I spent most of my life teaching children and raising my own 2 kids after my husband passed away. Life hasn't always been easy, but I built my home on patience, dignity, and hard work. My son Matthew is 34 now, successful in finance, and married to a woman named Lydia. My daughter Rachel is 28, still in graduate school, and she has always been protective of me. When Matthew and Lydia were ready to buy their first home, I wanted to help them start their life together. I used most of my savings to give them a down payment. To protect the investment, the deed was registered in my name, with Matthew listed as co-owner. Lydia's name wasn't included, and I didn't think much about it at the time. I believed we were one family, and the papers were only a formality. Still, I knew Lydia didn't care for me much. She was polite when she needed to be, but she made little remarks that revealed her true feelings. She would call me old-fashioned, tell Matthew to handle me when I asked questions, or roll her eyes if I spoke about traditions. Rachel noticed it too, and more than once she told me, "Mom, she doesn't respect you." I always answered the same way. She's Matthew's wife. For his sake, I'll keep the peace. When they invited me to their housewarming party, I was hopeful. I thought maybe things would finally change, that we could celebrate as a family without tension. I put on my best dress, wrapped a thoughtful gift, and walked to the door ready to smile. I had no idea that before I even stepped inside, Lydia would try to make me feel like I didn't belong. The evening of the housewarming, I walked up the front steps of Matthew and Lydia's new home with a small smile on my face. I carried a gift wrapped in silver paper, an antique clock that had once belonged to my parents. I thought it would be a special piece for them, something that carried family history into their new beginning. Rachel was by my side, balancing a bouquet of flowers she had picked up on the way. From the driveway, I could already hear music and laughter. The house glowed with warm lights, and I felt proud that my son had reached this point in life. He had a good job, a beautiful home, and a future he could build. My heart swelled, because in many ways, that house was a result of all the sacrifices I had made through the years. I had saved, budgeted, and given up personal comforts so that my children could succeed. But the moment I reached the door, the atmosphere shifted. Lydia appeared, her smile wide but cold, her hand resting on the doorframe as if to block my path. Behind her I could see well-dressed guests, chatting with glasses of wine in their hands. The scent of catered food drifted into the air, and laughter floated from the living room. "Elaine," she said brightly, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by the guests nearest the door. "This home is only for real family. Please don't embarrass us in front of our guests." Her words sliced through me like a knife. For a second I stood frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. Rachel's mouth fell open, her face turning red with anger. A couple of guests nearby went silent, shifting uncomfortably, as if they had overheard something they shouldn't have. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to remain calm. Inside, I felt humiliation burning in my chest. I was Matthew's mother, the woman who had carried him, raised him, and supported him. I had helped buy this very house. And yet here I was, being told I didn't belong, dismissed in front of strangers as if I were nothing. Rachel took a step forward, her voice sharp. "How dare you talk to my mother like that? She is family. She is more family than you will ever be." Lydia's smile tightened, but she didn't back down. She shrugged slightly, as if amused. "Rachel, it's nothing personal. We just want to keep things polished tonight. Our guests don't need complications." Complications, that's what she called me. I placed a gentle hand on Rachel's arm, signaling her to stop. "It's fine," I said softly, though my heart was pounding. "We're here to celebrate Matthew's new home. Let's not ruin the evening." Lydia smirked, clearly satisfied, and stepped aside to let us in. I walked past her with my head held high, refusing to let her see how much she had hurt me. The children of some relatives were running around in the corner, their laughter innocent and joyful. I smiled at them and set the gift on a table, though my hands were shaking. Inside, the rooms were filled with people Lydia had invited, her co-workers, her friends from yoga, neighbors I didn't know. She floated among them like the star of the show, gesturing around the house as if every detail had been hers to create. When she passed me, she didn't stop or introduce me to anyone. Instead, she raised her glass and said to one group of friends, "This is the kind of home we've always wanted, modern and fresh, not weighed down by the past." I heard the words clearly. So did Rachel, who muttered under her breath, "She means you, Mom." I kept my composure, smiling politely at the few guests who approached me, though most avoided eye contact after Lydia's comment at the door. I sat in a chair near the dining area, sipping a glass of water, while laughter and chatter filled the air. Every so often my eyes drifted toward Matthew. He moved, from guest to guest, shaking hands and thanking people for coming. He never came over to me, never noticed the way Lydia had treated me at the entrance. Or maybe he did notice and chose to ignore it. That hurt even more. Rachel leaned toward me, whispering fiercely, "Mom, you can't let her keep treating you like this. You've done too much for them." I took a deep breath and replied quietly, "Respect doesn't come from shouting, Rachel. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could." But inside, the humiliation lingered like a heavy weight. Lydia's words echoed in my mind. This home is only for real family. She had tried to push me aside in a house that was mine, as much as it was theirs. She thought she had won by embarrassing me in front of her guests. What she didn't realize was that the papers tucked safely away in a folder at home told a very different story. And as I sat there that evening, quietly enduring the party, I already knew there would be a moment soon when the truth would rise to the surface, and it would leave Lydia speechless. I sat through most of the evening quietly, watching the laughter and conversations swirl around me like I wasn't even there. Lydia moved from group to group with a bright smile, her voice carrying across the room as she talked about decorating choices, expensive furniture, and how hard she and Matthew had worked to make this house their dream home. Each word was like a tiny twist of the knife. Rachel stayed close to me, her jaw clenched. Every time Lydia brushed past me without acknowledgement or slipped another comment about modern families, Rachel's hands tightened around her glass. At one point, she whispered, "I swear, Mom, if she says one more thing, I'm going to stand on this table and call her out." I put my hand gently over hers. "Not tonight," I said softly. "There's no need to raise our voices." Rachel frowned. "So you're just going to sit here and let her walk all over you?" I shook my head. "I'm not letting her walk over me. I'm waiting. Sometimes you don't need to fight. Sometimes the truth fights for you." Even as I said the words, my mind was already working. Lydia thought she had control because she had a house full of guests. But what she didn't know was that the control had never been hers. That house, the very one she paraded around like a trophy, was still in my name. I had signed the checks. I had provided the down payment, and when the deed was filed, it was my signature that mattered. I had never flaunted it, because I didn't see it as power. I saw it as protection for Matthew. If things went wrong, I wanted him to have security. I never imagined that one day it would become the very proof of who truly belonged. I leaned closer to Rachel and whispered, "Text your Uncle Thomas. Tell him to bring the folder." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You mean the papers? Tonight?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Tonight?" Rachel's lips curved into a smile for the first time all evening. She pulled out her phone and quickly sent the message. Thomas, my older brother, had been the one to help me handle the paperwork when I gave Matthew the money for the house. He lived just a few miles away and kept an extra copy of the deed in his office. If anyone could deliver the truth calmly and clearly, it was him. Meanwhile, I remained seated, listening to Lydia's voice rise above the room. At one point, she gestured toward the large dining table and said loudly, "We wanted a space that reflects who we are, young, successful, and modern. It's our dream, and we built it ourselves." A few people clapped politely. I saw Matthew nod along, though he glanced away quickly when his eyes met mine. He knew deep down that Lydia's words weren't entirely true, but he said nothing, just like he had said nothing at the door. Rachel muttered under her breath, "She's writing fiction in her own living room." I simply smiled. Let her. The truth doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs the right moment. Half an hour later, as dinner plates were cleared, the doorbell rang. Lydia's voice floated from across the room. Could someone get that? When the door opened, there stood Thomas, tall and dignified, holding a leather folder under his arm. Lydia's smile faltered just a little. "Oh," she said, her tone confused. "A lawyer? Who invited you?" Thomas stepped inside calmly. "I'm here at my sister's request." The guests shifted in their seats, curiosity rippling through the room. Lydia let out a laugh that sounded thinner than usual. "Well, I hope this isn't anything serious. We're in the middle of a party." I rose slowly from my chair, smoothing the front of my dress. My heart was steady now, the earlier sting replaced by resolve. "It won't take long," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I think it's time we cleared up a small misunderstanding." Rachel's eyes sparkled with anticipation. Lydia tilted her head, clearly unsure of where this was going, but the confidence in her smile was starting to crack. I nodded to Thomas, who set the folder on the dining table. "Inside," I said, "are the documents for this house. The deed, the registration, everything filed legally. I know there's been a lot of talk tonight about ownership and family. I'd like to make sure everyone understands the truth." The room grew quieter, the guests leaning in with curiosity. Lydia's hand twitched slightly at her side, as if she wanted to stop me but couldn't figure out how. For the first time that evening, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I hadn't argued, I hadn't shouted, and I hadn't embarrassed myself. I had simply waited, letting Lydia think she had the stage, all while knowing the real curtain was about to rise. The room fell silent as my brother Thomas laid the leather folder on the dining table. The clinking of glasses stopped, and the hum of conversation faded as guests sensed something unusual was about to happen. Lydia's friends glanced at one another, eyebrows raised, while Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lydia forced a laugh, her tone sharp with unease. "Elaine, what is this?" "We're in the middle of a party. This really isn't the time for, paperwork." I looked directly at her, calm but steady. "Actually, Lydia, it's the perfect time. Tonight I heard a lot about family, and who belongs in this home. I think it's only fair that everyone here knows the truth about this house." Thomas unzipped the folder and slid a document across the polished table. "This is the registered deed for the property," he announced clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "It shows the legal owners of this house." I picked up the document and held it in my hands, then placed it down where everyone could see. When Matthew and Lydia bought this house, I provided the down payment. To protect the investment, the deed was filed under my name, with Matthew listed as co-owner. Lydia's name does not appear anywhere on these papers. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Guests leaned forward, whispering to each other. A few exchanged wide-eyed glances. Lydia's confident smile vanished, replaced with a stiff expression that betrayed her shock. Her hand clutched the back of a chair as though to steady herself. "That's not true," she said quickly, her voice rising. "This is our house. Matthew and I bought it together." Everyone knows that Thomas shook his head slowly. "The documents don't lie. The county registrar has this filed exactly as you see it. If anyone here doubts it, they can look it up themselves." Rachel, who had been simmering all evening, finally spoke up. "So Lydia, when you told my mom at the door that this house was only for real family, I guess you forgot who actually owns it." Her words were sharp but controlled, slicing through the tension like a blade. The guests shifted again, many now avoiding Lydia's gaze. One of her friends cleared her throat and looked away, clearly embarrassed to have witnessed the exchange. Another leaned in to whisper something that made the corners of her mouth tighten even more. Matthew finally rose from his chair, his face pale. "Mom, I didn't realize you were going to bring this up tonight," His eyes flicked nervously between me and Lydia. I met his gaze and spoke softly but firmly. I didn't want to, but when I'm told, in front of strangers, that I don't belong in a house I helped build, the truth needs to be spoken. Not for me, but for the respect this family should stand on. Matthew swallowed hard, unable to respond. His silence only made the point stronger. Lydia tried again, her voice trembling now. This is humiliating. You're making a scene, Elaine. I shook my head gently. No, Lydia. I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself. I stayed silent when you dismissed me at the door. I stayed silent while you paraded in front of your friends, but silence doesn't mean weakness. It means I waited until the right moment, and that moment is now. The weight of my words settled over the room. For the first time that night, the respect I had been denied was reflected in the eyes of the people around me. Some nodded subtly. Others glanced at me with quiet admiration. Even those who didn't know me well seemed to understand that dignity had just spoken louder than arrogance. Rachel leaned closer and whispered, "She'll never forget this, Mom." I smiled faintly. She doesn't need to forget. She needs to remember. Lydia sank back into her chair, her face pale, her glass of wine untouched. Her friends avoided looking at her directly now, their earlier laughter gone. The image she had worked so hard to project had cracked wide open in a single moment of truth. Thomas quietly gathered the papers, placed them back in the folder, and gave me a small nod. His presence alone was enough to seal the reality of what had been revealed. I sat back down, calm and collected, and sipped my water as if nothing unusual had happened. The room slowly began to hum again, but the energy was different. The guests spoke in quieter tones, their eyes lingering on me with new respect. The humiliation Lydia had tried to pour on me at the door had dissolved, replaced by her own. The power she thought she held slipped away the moment the truth was laid bare. And as I sat there, with Rachel smiling proudly beside me, I knew this was the turning point. Lydia might still see me as old-fashioned or inconvenient, but she could never again dismiss me as someone who didn't belong. Not in that house, not in that family, and not in my son's life. After Thomas packed away the documents and the room settled, the party never quite recovered its energy. The chatter was more restrained, and the guests who had witnessed the confrontation seemed cautious, as if they weren't sure whether to keep mingling or make excuses to leave. Lydia, who had spent the first half of the evening laughing the loudest, hardly spoke another word. She sat stiffly at the table, her cheeks pale and her eyes darting around as if she could find a way to regain control of the moment. But the truth had already spoken louder than anything she could say. Rachel leaned against me, whispering, "That was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen." I only gave her a small smile. This wasn't about satisfaction or revenge. It was about setting the record straight with dignity. As the night wound down, some of the guests came to me quietly. A neighbor I'd never met said, "I didn't know you were the one who helped with the house." That was incredibly generous. Another woman, one of Lydia's own friends, touched my arm gently and said, "You handled yourself with grace. Tonight, most people would have shouted. You didn't need to." Their words reminded me that even strangers can see the difference between arrogance and quiet strength. Eventually, I told Rachel it was time to go. I left the house the same way I had entered, calmly, with my head held high. This time, though, no one dared to block the door. The following week, Matthew came to my house alone. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his eyes heavy with guilt. He sat down at the kitchen table where so many of our family decisions had been made. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stopped her that night. I should have told her she was wrong." I nodded slowly, letting him sit with the weight of his own silence. "Yes, Matthew, you should have. Respect isn't something that can wait until it's convenient. When you stay quiet while someone you love is being humiliated, you're not protecting peace, you're allowing harm." He lowered his head. I thought keeping the peace would make things easier, but it only made things worse. I softened my tone. Marriage isn't about siding with your wife against your mother, or with your mother against your wife. It's about building a family where respect is the foundation. Lydia doesn't have to love me, but she has to respect me. And so do you. He nodded again, this time with tears in his eyes. I understand now. I don't know how to fix this with her. That's for the two of you to figure out, I said gently. But as for me, I won't beg for respect in a house I helped build. The papers may have made that clear, but I hope the lesson lasts longer than a document. After he left, I sat by the window, watching the sun set over the garden Richard and I had once planted together. I thought about the long years of sacrifice, the countless times I had chosen silence over confrontation, believing it was the noble path. That night at the housewarming had reminded me that silence has its place, but so does truth. Sometimes you must let the truth step into the light, even if it shakes the room. In the weeks that followed, Lydia kept her distance. She didn't call, didn't visit, and from what Rachel heard, she avoided talking about me to her friends. She had been embarrassed, and while I didn't take joy in that, I did feel peace knowing she could no longer dismiss me so easily. The balance had shifted. She knew now that I wasn't powerless, and more importantly, that my presence in Matthew's life was not optional. Rachel often reminded me, "Mom, that night was proof that you can be strong without being cruel. You didn't yell, you didn't insult, you just showed the truth." That's the kind of lesson I'll carry with me. Hearing that from my daughter meant more to me than anything else. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't for Lydia, or even for Matthew. It was for me. For years, I thought, keeping the peace meant swallowing pain. But true peace comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you. Respect is not given freely. It is earned, and sometimes it must be defended. That night, Lydia thought she could shut me out with a sentence. Instead, she reminded me of my own strength, and with one folder of papers, I reminded her, and everyone in that room, that real family isn't defined by appearances or by who laughs the loudest. It's defined by the people who build, protect, and sustain the home in ways that matter most. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let anyone make you feel small in a place you helped create. Stay calm, stay steady, and when the time is right, let the truth speak louder than their pride. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to my channel and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.